But first at 5, there's both applause and anger locally tonight over the Obama administration's new guidelines on transgender school students.
And we've been tracking this story since this morning when schools around the country received a letter from the federal government saying schools must not discriminate against transgender students, particularly over bathroom use.
Eyewitness News reporter Jared Kleiner spoke to both sides locally. He joins us live from the mobile newsroom with the new details.
Mike Shannon, well, supporters say this is motivation for school districts who have been slow to draft policies to get moving. Opponents say this is a troubling pattern from the feds. Two perspectives on a Friday morning letter from the federal government to school districts nationwide.
There's a carrot and a stick approach.
We call it a threat.
The Obama administration wrote districts are obligated under Title IX to allow transgender students to use bathrooms and locker rooms tied to their gender identity, not to their gender at birth. Failure to comply risks the loss of federal funds.
It's time for that.
Wendy Becker is with Youth Pride, Inc., devoted to LGBT youth services. Mike Stenhouse is with the Rhode Island Center for Freedom and Prosperity.
It's the arbitrary, one-size-fits-all, government by political correctness approach. Regardless how you feel on it, these should be local decisions.
The letter from the Departments of Justice and Education also touches on record keeping, terminology, and addressing harassment in schools. Becker says discrimination is and should be a federal issue, and transgender youth need enhanced protections.
We know that there is a great deal of harassment that they have to tolerate in schools. So we need to put an end to it.
Only one Rhode Island school district, Cumberland, has approved a policy on addressing the needs of transgender students. Stenhouse says today's action is encroachment into a space where the federal government shouldn't be.
That's okay when it comes to economic policy, but when it comes to personal values, I can assure you that the elitists in Smith Hill or in Washington, D.C. do not know what's in our best interests.
Cool. Now, just this week, the DOJ sued the state of North Carolina over its law requiring transgender people to use bathrooms associated with their gender at birth. Coming up new at 6 o'clock, does the state of Rhode Island plan schools guidance of its own, drafting policies of its own? We asked the governor about that. Live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom, I'm Jared Pletter, Eyewitness News.
A directive by the federal government is being felt locally. It involves transgender students using facilities they identify with. And new at 6, Rhode Island's governor weighs in on the topic and whether the state plans on issuing its own guidance to schools. Eyewitness News reporter Jared Kleiner is live from the mobile newsroom with more details.
Shannon, the federal government says this is not a creation of any new rules, but both sides agree this move is unprecedented. After the Obama administration wrote public school districts this morning saying they must allow transgender students to use bathrooms and locker rooms tied to their gender identity, not to their gender at birth. We asked Governor Gina Raimondo if she agreed and if the state plans to issue its own policies on accommodating transgender students.
We need to be sensitive to the needs and civil rights of all children, and they ought to be able to use a bathroom that they identify with. We're going to keep working on it and making sure that school districts continue to do the right thing.
The U.S. Departments of Justice and Education touched on an array of accommodations and on harassment in schools. They wrote failure to comply risks the loss of funding under Title IX. Objectors say this is federal overreach.
The arbitrary, one-size-fits-all, government by political correctness approach. These should be local decisions.
Clearly, there have been students who have been transgender students in schools already, and some of the schools have sort of quietly dealt with it. They just haven't had an overarching policy.
The only district with one, Cumberland. And in late 2014, Westerly School Committee tabled a rule that would have allowed transgender students to use bathrooms corresponding to their gender identity after public backlash. Live with the Providence Mobile Newsroom tonight, I'm Jared Pletter, Eyewitness News.